Our final presentation is about last notes, namely about the fact that Friedrich Kittler gave the notes from his final lectures to our next presenter, Berit Jane Soli-Holt. Both this generous gesture and the difficulties inherent in receiving this gift open the door for us to think about Kittler as a teacher. It is a scene of pedagogy that Berit Jane Soli-Holt and Avital Ronell are striving to evoke now. Pedagogy as an pedagogy that may trigger sites of contamination and parasitical anxiety, to borrow from Avital Ronell's lexicon. It is Kittler's institutional personality that will be profiled, as well as the affect and the effect that accompany a great teacher such as Friedrich Kittler. The context of the university as an institution also frames this conference and prompts our remembrance of him here at NYU as a teacher, a colleague, a thinker, and as a friend. In the university context, Kittler was at once an outsider and an insider, simultaneously a thinker of the margins and of the center. So I'm very excited to introduce Avital Ronell, who is an inspiring, challenging, and at times productively unsettling teacher to many of us. Avital Ronell... I don't think it's funny. Avital Ronell is a university professor as well as a professor of German, comparative literature, and English here at NYU. Her works, The Telephone Book from 1989, Stupidity 2002, Loser Sons 2012, share many medial and theoretical interfaces with Friedrich Kittler. Today she will join Berit Jane Soli-Holt, who studies at the European Graduate School and is currently a visiting artist scholar, designer, and coordinator at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. Her dissertation deals with materialism and epics. She is also an editor of Continent, an open-access para-academic journal, and her performance writing piece, 99 Problems, has been performed in Berlin, Kassel, and Hamburg. Her presentation today, or rather their presentation today, is called Material Engagement and Pedagogy, a report from Kittler's last seminar. Please join me in welcoming Berit Jane Soli-Holt and Avital Ronell.
Thank you for coming, for making this trip. This can be our opportunity to have also an intermediary report on the affinities and disaffinities of the endless, infinite, unendliches Verhältnis to Kittler, and to also get a sense of where we're at since, at least since Bernhard's presentation, we're thinking GPS cartographies and mappings in very rich ways. So this is an opportunity to open and close all sorts of dossiers, and I invited Berit because she is, as Danya said, in the fragile position of having received a gift from Friedrich Kittler, and a lot of this will be circuited in our conversation through Derrida's thinking of the gift and the gift of death, and the difficult, if imperceptible, tremulous situation of the one who purports to take on the gift. And the gift was given in the form of his last notes, which in an intralingual way is also his note, so Kittler's distress.
And also I'd like to say this is going to be a little bit different presentation, more of a performance eulogy, going through the notes. And I would say that the performance has already started by the invitation to be here. I won't say too much, but last night Avital was talking about Kittler as a squatter, and I'm probably a bit of a stray cat, wandering in and out. And this is how I've chosen to think through the last seminar with Friedrich Kittler. And in my reading of this performance writing, I will go in between 2013 and 2011, June 2011. So I will just demark from reading from my notes from that class by saying 2011, and I'll say 2013 when I read from now or over the last few months. I would like to pose an attempt at breathing the notes from Kittler's last seminar at the European Graduate School. We sit here now in a situation not unlike the parameters in which his words fell upon my ears: a room, a table, chairs, someone speaking, people sitting, some listening, and those hunched over scribbling notes. I took notes, notes taken on words spoken and words written. We get to a space by words. We find the means to express what happened there by words. We choose words for an ability to encode a certain place. And, well, to find a word for this place brings us to a point where more words follow dependent upon our initial word. A certain place, an experience, an understanding, and a flow of events. We begin to encode a shape of a boxing ring for our thoughts to appear. Maybe a garden plot, maybe a bus terminal. I'm not necessarily going to land on a definition of what particular place a word might encode. Only that words do encode is where I'd like to stay for the moment. 2011. One thing never mentioned, Linnaeus system, just 24 species of plants, because of alphabet, because God designed both. Out of these writing practices, we can see where Western sciences go and how they develop. A history of scripts, also history of their decipherment. Decipherment, not just historical or ideological, but at the heart of national security. (2013). We can talk about transmission. We can talk about inheritance. How relentlessly we preserve what has been said about what has been said. Certainly, this would seem to point to the oral, but this isn't in a positioning with or amongst the written. We write about what has been written. And I'm interested in the bits, the words, spoken or written. We build entire nations of space with our codes, words being the placeholders for common guideposts. A history of scripts, the history of their decipherment. What Kittler said strayed from what he wrote, what he had prepared to say. I'm moving slowly. What I wrote was often what he said. 2011. How power and command comes down to those who can read. Interested in the end of the Hammurabi stele. After all these laws, 90% material requirement and punishment. Last paragraph, the formalities. Anyone who takes away or adds a sign will be killed. Connection between forgery and heresy. 2013. Choices are necessary in taking notation. But is it always the thinking mind that makes those choices? A pencil breaks, we miss 2 beats. Is it a forgery or a heresy? To attempt a complete recreation, isn't this a forgery, a plagiarism? In the preservation of a specific code, the law, there exists a reliance on the letter to stand as sturdy as the stone it was written on. We write letters to create what we can see, discern, our vision, visualization, a usability of DNA, moments of a sandstorm, the turbulence of a waterfall. And here we get a sense of the sound that was important to Kittler in the roaring of the water tumbling from the rocks. Letters populate measures, but they remain the time takers, individualizing the breath with their rests and staccatos. I say I was in a seminar, and this conveys a set of parameters. A seminar involved bodies, insemination. Students are transformed, impregnated sometimes. Perhaps not, depending on the receptivity of the host. What kind of hospitality do I extend? I said earlier Kittler's words fell upon my ears, fell upon the pages of my notepaper. But there is no Kittler here, not in the flesh, today. 2011. Consonants as bones of writing, flesh, vowels, actualizing the bone, poeticizing the bone. A few letters from the alphabet, repeat and repeat. 2013. I'm rather confident that Kittler would find this situation of me interrupting my notes similar to Ezekiel and them dry bones, attempting a breathing. I have bits, remnants of the seminar I took with Kittler. And in the seminar, he spoke of these bits, perhaps bones, of course bones. But he did not merely speak consonants. There was breath. And this is what we mourn and what we celebrate, and why I pause before continuing. I can present a forgery of the seminar to remain true to the encoding of the seminar, to render its bits in a strict repetition. But that wouldn't be true to what was held inside Kittler's own deciphering of the history of scripts. I can't quite rely on duplicating words here. I must attempt a heresy, making a choice about how the words and concepts, how the words hang together, hang out together, travel in packs, how these words become embodied. 2011. Poets and not priests that have given the gods names and functions, this invention on a worldwide scale just once. And that was actually in Greece with Sappho, that he said in the seminar. 2013. I am not a priest. And while I may engage in poetic practices, I am not a poet. I've worked for a chef for a very long time. I come from the culinary where you take life in your hands. Life, not unlike words, holds rhythms of history, place, and time. You take the life, whether lamb or carrot, and transform it. The earth dies so that we may live. We don't eat recipes. 2011. No numerical values on the coins, merely name of city. Material of the concept, not writing down laws because you can change written laws. Theory of writing to combinatorial staters of syllables and word. Kittler finds it terrifying and simple question. Lifelong struggle between material and shape, recognizable form. Logos, sense is finally revealed. Letters, syllables, words. Matter, form, matter, form. 2013. We don't eat recipes, but we repeat them. We inherit forms, not matter. They take shape within us and craft the landscape around us. It isn't so much that we learn the words of our instructors, but that we are invited to see the shapes they've carved. Kittler's words, as he strung them together, came to me concerned about the relationship to the transmission of our language, our garb of being, into limiting forms. That we must always look for the ability of poetry to fill the cracks between our consonants, the vowelization within and amongst what has become for us static and brittle, deleterious in its crippling debility. It's an overcoming of the intonation of breath, the minimal movement of life. This is a material pedagogy, not in perhaps in particular the breath, but in Kittler's generosity, his giving, allowing an access and a decryption code to unlock the very material given as solid. Here are words, Kittler's words, that hold a record of a shape of his life, his study. Not only does he give an account of media theory in his scholarship, but also in his unlocking of an archaeology of our use of such media, he gives a code of praxis, an imperative to continue to give life amongst our small deaths. 2011, The Cross. My God, why did you leave me? A quotation from Psalm 22:2. Not Aramaic, Jesus. Slang, able to speak and read classical Hebrew. Similar, and this is a direct quote, if I were to speak in classic Chaucer. Situation of crucifixion is a linguistic problem. At first they kill him and then take over the vocalization of the text. 2013. According to Kittler, Jesus, who came from the backwoods of the land, learned texts. At about the same time, ancient Hebrew gained small marks within its consonants as vowel markers, breath markers. He drew it out so magnificently while noting the difficulties in proving that by speaking to everyday people, Jesus inspired the record of breath. These moments of opening up the ownership of codified knowledge, of giving a new life to ossified words, letters, making them inhabitable, hospitable, usable. Kittler would eventually tell us to study C++, to learn a language without context, to see its limitations. But I believe it was to be able to bring breath to the codes that shape our lives, to allow a reciprocity with the information that surrounds us. Do we do a disservice to Kittler when we leave him in the consonants of media theory instead of the assonance of media practice? 2011. The letter kills. The breath, vowels, give life. Vowels in letter form keep the spoken word. Resurrection of the flesh, vowel system. After a break, Ezekiel and the bones, transmitting the bones. Exclusion of vowels not strict, flexible system between prose and poetry. And in parentheses, he wants to study more. 2013. To keep alive, not what Kittler said, but how he said it. To be relentless in our research, but to make it worth it by loving every minute of it and to pronounce it with fervent delight. We have been presented with his recipes in all aspects of his scholarship, but we are not carbon paper. We may be imprinted with what he transmitted, roughly, but the breath is our own, as we've seen these last couple days. We've been invited to participate in the shape of Kittler's own forgery, his heresy in breaking apart the bits to discover the lifeless bones of code and the breath that animates. Kittler watched the top spin. Instead of the philosopher in Kafka's story who grabbed the children's top, Kittler monitored its rotation and let it spin. 2011. Feedback loop. Philosophy could become experimental. Hegel was in a position of not knowing where phenomenology of spirit would go when he wrote it. To celebrate the new philosophical freedom, readers would have to read twice. Not the formalism, scholastic formalism. Let the philosophic pen run on its own speed, paper produced as endless flow. How deep can you encode the physical world? A very short string, giving out a lot of output, as in algorithms. 2013. Kittler was a short string, vibrating intensely. Whether in person or in his writing, he gave a lot of output, perpetuating multitudes of possible codes and those inspired by his scholarship. And I would argue that within and amongst his words lies much more than data, but an imperative to breathe one's own breath, bringing much needed life to dry bones. By the end of our time together in the seminar, Kittler's own breath became short. But his eyes remained ever electric and sparkling as he'd peer over the tops of his glasses at us, imploring us with ever-shortening aphorisms. 2011. We should all write a poem in pencil and paper. Scientific progress is the reduction of real numbers to natural ones. Our organs have names before we were born. Stability is a powerful activity. Read original sources. Look at Descartes, Medium, and Thomas Aquinas. Take your time. 2013. May our own eyes remain as ever sparkling in the excitement of our studies. Thank you.
This was an opportunity for us to open some dossiers and open discussion to all of you. I'm loath to follow up on such a heartfelt presentation. I want to thank you personally. Arne and I thought we wanted to trace out an arc today by having some of the let's call them students provisionally, of Friedrich Kittler, and then end on the note or note and notes of the last class, which we tried to thematize also last night in Lindsay's video mashup, where you see him stand as he closes his folders, and he leaves the space of teaching. I don't know where your energy is, and it's actually important because I don't have an avidity to talk if you're being brutalized. If it's very sadistic, then I might get it on with you. But otherwise, if it's just dreary for you, how are you doing? Shall we continue a little more? Do you have a little more stamina still? Okay. And you can also chime in and make your interventions. So and it feels a little foolish to follow upon this with some hermeneutic kinds of retorts or replications or... Let's do it anyway.
Let's do it.
I'm just going to give some bullet points out. Thank you for the encouragement, and say what I thought, to quote someone that Nimrod brought up earlier, Barbara Johnson. She always would say, "What is at stake?" So that was a kind of obsessive motif and helped me move along in certain ways, like what is at stake in certain claims and utterances, refusals, disavowals, some of the things that you bring to the table, the empty and abandoned table, is, and it's not a question necessarily, but the motif or materiality of the student body. What is the student body? How is it constituted? Through which orifice does transmissibility occur? Where does one receive the lesson? Hamacher, who couldn't make it here today, once wrote that learning always takes place as a trauma, which is to say, I suppose, among other things, that you can't really locate it. That's why I appreciated the double dating systems. You can't locate it. You can't say exactly when it arrives in a Derridian, destinaring way. When will it show up in you? What has been said or learned or put out there, like a projectile perhaps? Will it arrive in a space of the unconscious or some other kind of register to which we don't have access immediately? Therefore, in a dream, therefore in some sort of non-arrival or disrupted arrival or failed arrival, or some sort of glint of arrivability. When does it show up, the teaching, the learning? And this is one of the things that we want to leave open, radically open and exposed, because it may not show up in time for us.
Well, and we talked about that too, you and I, the late arrival, and I find it really nice that following David Walbury's talking about this initial paper, and then my experience coming late, very late, almost too late, to listen to Kittler. And it was, there is that kind of the timing aspect where do we begin when it comes with like the idea of the oeuvre. It was really interesting last night. This is kind of like a personal thing, but I want to continue, like watching those videos of Kittler, and many people in this room having seen Kittler and his exuberance lecturing. And it was probably one of the more traumatic seminars I've taken. But what really, because of his health. But even within that, and this is maybe with the body and the students, and what I was trying to kind of maybe capture, maybe just, I'm not sure if capture, perhaps a little photographic, but I wanted to show was that even though there was this difficulty in health, that I don't know if I've ever seen somebody so excited about the alphabet. Like, he was very, and just so exuberant, even in his body not necessarily being able to maintain sitting sometimes.
What, I'm supposed to say something after that?
No, I was just looking. I'm being sadistic.
You sure are, baby. And we'll take it outside in a minute. We're in New York City.
Oh, that's all right.
So, if we had time, we'd address two things that you said. One is the belatedness and the sense of being late to the seminar, which is, by the way, since time immemorial, a motif, right? Which is also Heidegger's assignment for us latecomers on what is one to do with that lapse and disjunctive relation to something like eventfulness. And for an event to be an event, as Derrida said, it has to bypass us. If we could capture, and you were right to stumble on that, or receive an event, then it's not an event. But this is why we do want to remember also what Larry insisted on, which is the possibility that the commemorative, let's say, intention that we formed here would actually work as an implemented disavowal machine. So allow something to happen here under the name of Friedrich Kittler that we don't know how to identify or recognize, and allow something to happen from the advent of his first seminar paper that David brought to us today, and the question of the prestige of the signature that Arne was telegraphing, and what it does, what kind of pressure it puts on a text in a recursive or retrogressive way to try to understand how oeuvre constitutes and is constantly also undoing itself and disarticulating itself, eluding us. When you have a sense that you're nailing an oeuvre, as the Benjamin industry probably often awards itself with, that is another form of denial and forgetting. I mean, because there's such a hyper-mastery and attentiveness and competence with regard to the corpus signed by Benjamin, that an over-saturation may be as difficult to allow, if one has the right to allow anything, as a forgetting or an outright under-representation. We just wanted to open a few dossiers here under the name and pressure of the loss or the return to us of Friedrich Kittler. If we had time and we weren't so late and we weren't running late on some existential onto-hermeneutic level, we would start by asking you to think with us what a seminar überhaupt is. Many of you encountered Friedrich Kittler in seminar, as seminar, and we've, of course, encountered the philosophical origins as so many seminars through Lacan's seminars or Derrida's published seminars. Derrida continues to publish. Thank you. So if we had time, we would think of the seminar, the seminal flow, the seminal word, and why we started off with what is constructed provisionally as gendered as in the feminine. Forgive me, Elizabeth, for even suggesting that, or you or me, but nonetheless, we're trying to also, in many discrete ways, to push against a history of impossible foreclosure for the feminine, or Friedrich's opening of the seminar through Friedrich Nietzsche, to women, and the first time someone must have said, according to Kittler, and I say it again, meine Damen und Herren, and opened the space of seminar work to whatever is understood by including the stray cat that slithers in by seminar, and who's allowed, who can move with the seminal flow or not, or disrupt it, or just be swallowed up by it or swallow it, and so on and so forth, whatever one has done historically with semen, including spill it on the sidewalk and just all right. But enough of my autobiographical traits. Just to suggest, you know, what's a seminar? And what are we doing in a seminar or the university and so on and so forth? If I do it with a little American New York talk and entertainment value, it's because this is what one has to do as well. Was Kittler part of, how did he present himself as a teacher? In the videos that you selected, Lindsay, he just had a sense of staging and stage direction that was magnificent. I don't know what it was like up close and personal. I don't remember. I only sat in a couple of times. But the way he held the table and held his body and also smoked, puff, 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 gulp, gulp, puff, puff, through his relation to language, the way his eyes would look elsewhere as he's being interviewed and he has a connection with the above and he's thinking of something, you know. I just wonder if we could even consider the history of the Kittlerian body as he taught and fought for breath and also pissed people off. And in what we learned was a false original dialect or accent, you know, that he'd have that seductive lilt and say something really fucked up and smile, and his provocations as a teacher, as a speaker, the softness of the voice that punched through all sorts of new codes and decoded and deauthorized other codes. Does anyone want to pick up here?
Yeah, do we have time for a couple of questions?
We have time for, I will skip the part on toilet training that I have here, but I did want to mention something about transferential densities that we're experiencing perhaps, and we want to just be aware that especially in Q&A, a lot of the speakers revealed very deeply felt anxiety still, which shows the freshness of a woundedness in relation to this powerhouse. You know, there's still unsettled debts, which is probably good, as well as maybe according to certain personal inscriptions, psychical inscriptions, catastrophic in some ways, unfinished business with our man, Friedrich Kittler. And I was talking briefly with Rüdiger Kampe, who, if you, may I quote you? Do I have your permission and waiver? That we're not yet seeing, unless, let me place this as a hypothesis, a Kittler discourse here. I've had the very unfortunate privilege of mourning Derrida, Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, and others, all irreplaceable, unsubstitutable. But the language would have been drenched in Derridian or Lacoue-Labarthian, and we would have been soaked in a certain way. Here, there are many pockets of resistance, perhaps, also healthy, I'm sure. But I just want to note it, this is a bullet point. What is a disciple? This is something Husserl asked when he said, they're so fucked up, you can't count on them, they, you know, will turn on a dime and so on and so forth and betray you. Only Eugen Fink, that's a disciple. You should all get one if you can, while you can. So does Kittler have, properly speaking, whatever this is, disciples? Has he founded a school? You know, or is he more like Zarathustra's, Nietzsche, I was going to say, I mean Nietzsche's Zarathustra, where he says, get lost. Just get out of my face and get lost. You know, which way does it go? Which is, of course, to repel the Jesus of Nazareth pedagogy of, come here, children, and so on and so forth. So let's just note the transferential densities, the perversion of destinies, perhaps, and tracks, where one's falling off certain tracks. The edipedagogy, which is also encompassed in one of Friedrich's important signifiers and movements of thought, which is love. Your voice cracked, that's a sign of love. I'm shaking now. It's contagious, you know. And so I'm going to just remind us of the rights of nerves. And Friedrich seemed to practice the rights of nerves like no others. If something, I mean, what is your hermeneutic principle? What motivates you? What drives your thought? These are certain questions. I may be mistaken. I may be idealizing him. I tended to escape the sweep or the negative transference that he made necessary in response to some of his outrages. I felt protected somehow from some of Friedrich's, maybe you all love him and there's no ambivalence or something, and I'm just hallucinating up here, but there was a lot of protection and security for me with very few people in life. So I'm kind of maybe overly thankful and full of gratitude that, as Nietzsche has taught us and Melanie Klein, that gratitude can turn into a cannonade of sorts of aggressions that one isn't even in control of. So what does over-gratitude mean? That would be another subsidiary questions. Anyway, my sense is that Friedrich was often run on the fuel of the rights of nerves, which is to say, when something pissed him off, like the entire university or the field of Germanistic, that was enough to fuel him and motor him to get going and punch himself out of those bags in a certain way. Other times he was very moved and would allow himself to be attracted in almost inexplicable ways. And Elisabeth earlier on said she was offended by some of this decision with the vowels missing in Semitic languages and so on. But he'd get really into a kind of circuitry and couldn't break it critically for some reason. But that might be the rights of nerves too, whatever that is. So these are some of my responses, and I'll leave out toilet training, I'll say again. Big renunciation for me, because I do want to open this up to anyone who wants to make a self-critical remark about concerning the work we've been doing so far, or an intervention, or if you want to sing a song. You can do that. If you want to scream, you may do that. But before we break for the day, I do want to thank everyone for their remarkable work, the reverential and highly disciplined silence as well. I don't take that lightly, the beautiful and deep silence of which you are all capable of, and the listening with or without the nervous little rabbit ears. So would you like to move in on any of these remarks or observations or reflections that are on the level of a pedagogical maybe overreach in some ways, but we do want to remember among so many things, and that even though we think we know what a teacher is or a teaching is, and we're all ensnared in it somehow if we're here in this space, it still remains deeply enigmatic, problematic, and transferentially fraught.
Is everybody ready for dinner?
I think people are.
That's an appropriate response as well.
No,
I just wanted to ask about the term pedagogy, which came up a few times, and whether we, in some sense, become children in the seminar situation, which is also fraught with ideas of reproduction, and do we bear fruit in some sense, or do we ourselves become childlike somehow, as a small footnote to something that you said?
Thank you very much. It's a rich question, and it's also, I'm fast forwarding now, would account for certain parasital or patricidal tendencies that one is never easily relieved of. This is a big question, what the relation is. And I think it can have provisionally all sorts of permutations and structures, and destructuring as well, because the sujet supposé savoir, the teaching body, can be completely wrecked by the experience of teaching, maybe a false experience of giving and overgiving and exposure, and yet, certainly in the, strike the and yet, that's logically not going to work. In the German lexicon, certainly the advisor is considered maternal or paternal Doktor, Vater oder Mutter oder so. And that is continually reinscribed, but anyone who, which is all of us who have been traversed by and traversed the Freudian corpus, knows how dangerous that is to descend into familialisms that are at once tempting, foreboding, dangerous, mistaken. That kind of leakage of that tropology is very problematic. That's why I just thank you for the question. I think there must be a temptation. The Nietzschean way would be to say, why and how did this start, on what energy and what determination? But already with Socrates, of course, the desire for the child is infinite and sexually harassing. It's not only students who get sexually harassed, by the way. I'm inspired by what David Welbury said about this sudden kind of what's happening in this infinite and endless Verhältnis, which is also transposable, I'm sure with some damage and residue, to the teaching situation. What happens in the relation to the other? Does one need to be prodded and poked? It's the Heideggerian Stoß, or the persecuting push in Levinas that we briefly discussed early on, or Hamacher's sense of the traumatic necessity of that learning brings about. So if you return to Freud and toilet training, which I will not talk about, when Freud asks, when does a mother hout or hit, and how is that the beginning of all education, training the sphincter, which I will not mention. All of it, is one a trainer, a horse whisperer, is one a coach? This is all unsettled by a teacher, luminous and impossible in some ways, I think, in my experience at least, as Friedrich Kittler, who makes you re-ask what a teaching is or can be or must be or can't be. Thank you.
And just to piggyback on that with the impossibility of Kittler, as I know you weren't able to see it, but one of his first notes was, beware the presentism of your instructors. And then he went on to give this seminar. So it's always this like,
beware the what?
Presentism. It's like, don't listen to me, listen to me. Well, I mean, it wasn't saying don't listen to me, but to just beware. And then he went on to teach, which it was a nice impossibility.
You know, there's all sorts of subcategories as well of the edipedagogical transferential urgency. Maybe as, okay, buckle your seatbelts, as the great teacher Paul de Man said. Are we okay? Charisma is the least acceptable accessory or transmission system of the teaching body. Maybe one should, and almost ethically, train to be a little subdued, boring, and what is this need, you know, and then the whole problem of evaluation and teacher evaluations that push you toward a certain affect of transmission. These are things to consider as well. And so when Kittler said, beware of the presentism of the presenter, one should be infinitely suspicious of the dazzling appearance of the one who occupies the place of the sujet supposé savoir.
Excuse me for not being able to answer your question what a disciple is. I'm completely unable to do that. But let me add a few remarks to his way to deal with the question what teaching and seminar and university is. I mean, he never talked about the things he talked about, be it the alphabet, be it literature, whatever, without precisely giving the date when a seminar was invented by Schelling, I think it was, and as a starting point for Germanistic. He never spoke about the Betrieb, the busyness of the university, without quoting another text of Nietzsche, die Zukunft der preußischen Bildungsanstalten, the future of the Prussian institutes of education, with these Nietzsche's very cynical remarks on what a seminar is. What is a seminar? It's a speaking mouth, and 30 ears, and on these ears hang 30 arms that write down what is coming out of that mouth. That was Friedrich's way to polemicize the context he was in. And so
one thing,
yeah,
which is in that Nietzsche moment, and the pens are attached to the paternal belly of the state.
yes,
So they're like
exactly.
not even freely writing.
So he was highly. What I want to say about this is that he was highly reflective about the place in which he was speaking and what that meant and what the power system was. And nothing, I think, was less interesting to him than the question what a good teacher is. Nothing. He did not care at all. And a didactic was a Schimpfwort. What is a Schimpfwort in term of abuse for him? There is one, I think, essay of him that I think all of you, or most of you, hate because you love Derrida so much here. That is his essay on Derrida's didactic, which is a sharp criticism on Derrida, and that he called as Derrida's didactic is nearly an insult. It's a Derrida insult. I would nearly go so far to call it that way. And so, because didactic was the least, a didactica, that was the least he wanted to be. And I think his principle of teaching was just that, not to care about good teaching. And so what are you doing if you do not care about good teaching? You just don't care whether your students understand what you're doing or not. That is not the rule of the game. So in Freiburg, when he gave his seminars, when he still was very deep in Lacan, just one example, I mean, he was writing these algebra, this Lacanian algebra on the blackboard without explaining it, which is so that, and so on. And so you just had the chance, either you went home and read that stuff, you know, and cared for yourself that next week you would maybe understand it a little bit better, or you was waiting for an explanation in the seminar and then you were lost and then you wouldn't come back. I mean, that was his trick. Either you would be fixed on by that or not, right? And there was no pedagogy, no didactic, no explanations. He just did not care. And that was good, I think.
I completely agree with the Freiburg years, and I can't speak about anything else, but Freiburg years, and I mean, I think that transferred into the fact that he never gave so-called theory seminars. He never addressed any other theory, but also not his own. And I think there was one such theory seminar, and he gave that for some reason, and he said that it had something to do with that after he received his habilitation. At that moment, there was one so-called theory seminar, and it was not the real Kittler seminar we loved.
I would just respond that the syntagm of "he didn't care" would be something for us to consider and work with in a Heideggerian, Derridian way, what kind of a stance that is. But as a teacher of not caring, he taught me something, I have to say. I remember way back when we, and I only permit myself the anecdote because Benjamin stresses the cognitive value of the anecdote. I remember when none of us were much of anything, we were peanuts, and we decided to do a panel at the MLA and to play that game. And when it came to Q&A, Friedrich said, "No, I don't give a shit. I don't care what they do or don't think or understand or want to understand." So that was such a shock for me, that one didn't have to be tethered to the grilling moment of Q&A. And that, I thought that, I didn't necessarily turn it into a practice, but I saw suddenly a world open up where you can prefer not to.
I'm picking up on the motto of this conference, namely the Sirens Go Silent. And I'm thinking in the context of this motto about das Schweigen der Sirenen. Could it not be that Kittler's teaching style, his pedagogy, was a practice of das Schweigen der Sirenen? But my question would be, is not the Schweigen der Sirenen the most seductive of all? After all, the sailors on the ship of Ulysses had to hold their ears so they couldn't hear that Schweigen der Sirenen. So there's a kind of paradox there in that not caring, not being passionate, not giving your all in teaching. Is that not to a certain degree, the most awful seduction? That would be a question that I would like to posit here. Thank you.
It's wonderful, Fred. I'm sure that generations got hooked on Friedrich's so-called not caring. It's a major seduction, and it's at the same time, this is maybe a romantic motif. I mean, would we even ask whether Socrates cared? You know, who cares? Or who cares, and to what extent? And now the Heideggerian Sorge is, of course, running interference, but what kind of a concern is concern about teaching? But those were the good old days when teachers would get away with running with the Schlegelian unintelligibility and just do your thing and not be punished for it.
And I think that it wasn't that he was passionless. I don't think it was that he didn't care about the passion. He was incredibly passionate. And I think when it comes to why I appreciated that brief chance that I got was because he might not have cared if we got it, but he showed us how to just dive in and love what you're working with, and how to, and then, I mean, and giving, like you were saying, you know, having to go back and you have to do your own work. You know, in that non-caring, he shows, he lights a fire, I say.
That might revert to a kind of Wittgensteinian sense of teaching, which is you just let people witness you thinking, even if it means just staring out the window in front of them. All right. So there's another intervention. And we'll soon disband unless anyone feels a practically visceral need to speak.
Yes, I was just really struck by what we were saying from when David Welbery was mentioning his objectivity, and now our questioning of whether of either not caring or being just very, very devoted in work and in the work that he was doing. And on the other hand, our own approach and this very intense, very personal subjectivity that we're posing in relation to him right now. And I'm not sure that I can formulate a very clear question, but I think it's important to speak to the ways in which we approach Kittler right now, given his objectivity, if we want to say so, and our subjectivity. Given that this is honoring him, it seems to me almost as though we're trying to bring him to life with all of the emotion that we're investing right now and all of the very personal responses. So I was wondering if that's something to speak to.
My piece is personal. It's a little bit personal. And I didn't want to do something, the recursivity of kind of like talking about the words and having the bits and all of that. That is something that I really became passionate about watching him. But I'm not going to embody Kittler. I don't want to do exactly what he did. I want to do it kind of what I do, which has a personal part of it. And so I'm actually kind of pleased with what has talked about, like some of the comments and of this personal aspect of Kittler, and I'm glad that what we've been talking about has drawn that out, because that's something that I like to do and that I'm passionate about. And so I think your comment's very good, because it's always good to kind of, this is to circle it back and say, okay, then what is this then in the light of what we've been talking about and what we've been studying? Okay, what is this then? So I really appreciate that comment.
David Welbery wants to be loaded with the responsibility of having advocated some objectivity. There may be we're opening dossiers here. I wouldn't want us to pathologize or really pinpoint with great certitude what's happening, nor to receive too readily what will have happened, to use the future anterior tense. And also to the degree that it's possible, because we are squeezed by institutional signifiers, okay? To the degree that it's possible, we wanted to proceed by opening and going full throttle. Broken voices are welcome, stammers are welcome. Earlier, Elizabeth stammered and stuttered in a very poignant and necessary way. Let me just say that there are many, many unresolved and unfinished businesses around and with Friedrich Kittler, and since we at NYU consider ourselves so unique and special, we didn't hesitate to inject a little Californian open-heartedness, and this isn't necessarily a healing circle, jerk, but it's not entirely out of the question that even though we're samurai academics, many of us, and we're steeled and we know how to perform the academic pirouette and so on and so forth, there is a loss to be accounted for, and through that loss we can maybe allow Friedrich Kittler to emerge in one of his many, many, many registers and personalities and sub-personalities. So if we could go with the richness of incredible aporia, contradiction, even unintelligibility, incoherency, and remarkable rigor all at once, I think that would be a wonderful accomplishment here.
And I believe that would be a wonderful challenge for tomorrow to do all these things at once. And we've been talking about the institution, and maybe it is for tonight time to get out of the institution, but I'll give the... We do applaud.